Layla Brooks never expected the world to pause for her. Every morning, she woke before the sun dared to stretch its arms across the Chicago skyline. The city still slept as she sipped her coffee alone, slipping into her sleek black blazer and neat heels. No frills, no drama. Just precision, punctuality, and professionalism. 5 years of quietly running the world behind a man who hardly knew her name. To Lancaster Enterprises, Ethan Whitmore was the heartbeat of the empire. Cold, calculating, unshakably brilliant. A white American billionaire with steel blue eyes that rarely blinked. A man who commanded boardrooms with the ease of breath. To the media, he was the embodiment of the untouchable elite. But to Layla, who saw him daily, scheduled his flights, reviewed his contracts, and ensured his world never cracked, he was just, deeply, devastatingly alone. She never said it aloud, of course. Not even to herself. But it was in the way she noticed he never smiled unless it was for the cameras. The way his office, though pristine, held no trace of joy. No family photos. No warmth. Only power, neatly folded into glass and steel. Layla was a woman who lived in the margins of someone else's spotlight. A black woman with brilliance in her veins and fire in her bones. Yet every accomplishment she made disappeared under the name Mr. Whitmore. But she never minded. Not really. She was never after attention. Just excellence. Every morning, she checked the temperature of his coffee to the degree. Knew which pens he favored for contract signings. Remembered which client needed charm and which one needed steel. Ethan never said thank you. Never even looked at her for longer than necessary. But once, just once, when she adjusted his tie before a press conference, their eyes locked for a second. And Layla could have sworn something shifted in the air between them. Something unspoken, something real. Still, she pulled away. "Good luck, Mr. Whitmore," she said, as if nothing had passed between them. He didn't respond. But his silence held weight that day. They were two people from different worlds, orbiting the same universe. One is moving visibly, the other, her, holding the gravity together from the shadows. And maybe that would have been enough, if the universe hadn't cracked. It happened on a Monday. The kind of Monday that tastes like ash before breakfast. Layla had reviewed the documents 3 times and was sure of it. Every clause, every line. But the moment the investors stormed in with fury painted across their brows, she knew something had gone wrong. Terribly, irrevocably wrong. And the worst part? The altered clause bore her signature. The glass tower of Lancaster Enterprises echoed with tension. Emails flew back and forth like bullets. Executives barked orders into phones. And at the center of it all, Ethan sat silent behind his desk, the weight of billions pressing on his shoulders. "Miss Brooks," he said, his voice low and cutting as a blade, "explain this." She stood there, heart thundering beneath her skin, looking at the document that might end her career. She knew she hadn't changed the clause, but someone had. And it didn't matter who. The fire was already burning, and someone needed to be thrown into it. So she inhaled and exhaled. "It was my mistake, sir," she said quietly. "I should have rechecked it." Ethan didn't move. His face remained unreadable. But something in his eyes flickered. "You're fired," he said. She expected it, had even rehearsed it in her head. But nothing prepared her for the way it hollowed her out. She didn't cry. Not in front of him. Not even when he stood as if to say something, but didn't. She just nodded. "I understand, Mr. Whitmore." And she walked out. Not a word more. Not a glance back. Behind the glass walls, Chicago glittered like a city untouched by grief. But Layla Brooks knew. Everything had just changed. If you've made it this far, Thank you. Truly. This story is just beginning, and trust me, you'll want to stay with it. If you've ever loved in silence, fought battles in the background, or felt like the world didn't see you, this story is for you. Tell me in the comments, have you ever sacrificed something for someone who never even knew? And if Layla's quiet strength has already moved you, hit that follow button, like, share. Let's keep these stories alive, because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear them. The hallway outside Ethan's office was hushed, almost reverent, like a cathedral in the aftermath of prayer. Layla walked with her head held high, every click of her heels on the polished marble, echoing louder than the voice she had just swallowed inside. No one met her eyes. Some offered glances, fleeting, pitying, uncomfortable. Others looked away entirely, as if pretending not to see her would make the scene vanish. To them, she was just another name on the list of people Ethan Whitmore had removed without blinking. Another disposable piece in a gleaming machine that tolerated nothing less than perfection. But Layla wasn't just anyone. She had built the rhythm of that machine. She had been its pulse. Her office had once been a sanctuary of order, files neatly aligned, monitors warm with activity, the faint scent of lavender from the diffuser she refilled weekly to make the space feel human. Now, it felt like a stranger's desk. She packed quickly, methodically, as if gathering fragments of a former self. A framed picture of the team, now distant smiles in cheap glass. Her well-worn planner, marked with the fingerprints of 5 years' worth of tireless detail. And the fountain pen, sleek, silver, engraved with her initials. A gift from Ethan, the year they landed the Harmington deal. He hadn't handed it to her personally. It had been left on her desk without a note, but she'd known. It had meant something. Or at least she had wanted to believe it did. She placed it gently in the box last. The city outside was soaked in late afternoon light when she reached the lobby. The kind that made everything look softer, golden, almost kind. She hated that it still looked beautiful, that the world kept spinning, indifferent to endings. The doorman, who usually greeted her with a warm Ms. Brooks, nodded today. In return, she offered a faint smile, unsure if she appreciated or resented the silence. When she stepped onto the sidewalk, the breeze brushed her cheeks like an old friend trying to offer comfort. But there was no comfort in this moment, only numbness, and the low ache of dignity held too long. She walked, not because she had anywhere to go, but because her body needed motion, something to replace the unraveling inside. Chicago pulsed around her, horns, laughter, hurried steps, people with plans, destinations, and purpose. She passed storefronts she used to love, cafes where she once met friends, intersections where she used to wait with coffee in hand, mind full of schedules and budgets. Now her hands were full of cardboard, and her mind was blank. A park bench found her before she realized she was tired. She sat, and for a long while, she just watched. Children chased pigeons across the grass, their joy loud and unapologetic. A violinist played under the shade of a sycamore, the music weaving through the breeze like something half-remembered. A couple walked by holding hands, murmuring secrets Layla would never know. And still, the world moved on. She looked down at the box in her lap, at the pen. Her fingers hovered over it. Its weight was heavier than she remembered. Sleek, cold. It had once been a symbol of recognition, of value. Now, it felt like a cruel echo. She didn't cry. She hadn't allowed herself to. Not since Ethan said the words. Not even when she had looked into his eyes and saw nothing. No hesitation. No flicker of the man she had believed lived beneath the ice. But the pain wasn't just about the job. It was how she had said, "I understand," without letting her voice break. It was the way he didn't stop her, even though he stood as she turned away. As if he almost did. Almost. And almost was sometimes the cruelest word. Back in his office, Ethan stood by the window, watching the street below, as though it might tell him something he didn't already know. His hands were in his pockets, his posture rigid. But his eyes, those calculating, unreadable eyes, were fixed on the woman in the gray coat who had just disappeared around the corner. There had been something about the way she said it. Not pleading, not defensive, just accepting, as if she already knew the outcome before stepping through his door, as if she had already decided to carry the weight of a mistake that wasn't hers. She hadn't defended herself. She hadn't even asked for a second chance. That unsettled him. Ethan prided himself on detachment, on being immune to the sentimentality that ruined other men in his position. He didn't allow weakness, not in business, not in himself. And yet, he felt it. A slow, spreading discomfort beneath his ribs. Regret was not a language he spoke fluently, but it was fluent enough to whisper to him in quiet moments tonight. He turned from the window, poured a glass of bourbon he didn't want, and tried to silence the echo of her voice in his head. "It was my mistake, sir." But it wasn't. He knew it wasn't. The security logs had already confirmed what she couldn't have known. An internal breach in the document archive. Someone had accessed the file. Someone other than her. He would find out who, but not tonight. Tonight, he sat in the silence she left behind, surrounded by perfection that suddenly felt hollow. Layla Brooks curled beneath her coat on a worn apartment couch somewhere across the city, staring at the ceiling as streetlight shadows moved across her walls. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that held too much. Questions. What ifs. Wounds not yet named. But buried under it all, beneath the ache, anger, and exhaustion, was a flicker of something fierce. A fire. She had fallen, but she was not broken. Not yet. Ethan Whitmore wasn't used to silence. Not this kind, anyway. In his world, silence had always meant control. The quiet before a verdict in a boardroom. The pause that forced a negotiating partner to speak first. The deliberate calm he wielded like a blade. But since Layla Brooks had walked out of his office with a box in her arms and her dignity unshaken, silence had begun to feel different. It was no longer a tool. It was an echo. She hadn't defended herself, hadn't raised her voice or begged for fairness. And somehow, that cut deeper than any accusation could have. That night, long after the last assistant had left, and the city lights blinked in rhythm beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, Ethan remained in his office. Bourbon untouched. The laptop is open but idle. A single tab blinked at him. A report from the internal security team. The access logs didn't lie. She hadn't changed the contract. He knew it now with certainty. Someone else had accessed the file, modified it just enough to derail the deal, and done so with enough precision to pin the fallout on her. He could have called her, could have apologized and admitted the mistake. But he didn't. Pride sat beside him like an old, heavy friend. It whispered excuses in his ear. She'll be fine. She was just an assistant. You don't owe her anything. But there was something beneath all that logic he couldn't quite. A memory. Her eyes had met his, steady and unafraid, even as she said, "I understand, Mr. Whitmore." She had known he wouldn't believe her, and she had accepted it. That unsettled him more than anything else. Across the city, Layla stood in front of the bathroom mirror in her small apartment, wiping off the remnants of another fruitless day. She had spent the past 12 hours in uncomfortable heels, moving from interview to interview, each ending in the same rehearsed smile from across a desk and a hollow promise to be in touch. They never were. She knew the whispers were out there, knew that her name, once respected in executive circles, had become synonymous with a collapsed deal. Reputations were fragile currency in the corporate world, and hers had been shattered in a single breath. Still, she pushed through it because she didn't know how not to. After changing into her faded t-shirt and worn sweatpants, she sank onto the edge of her bed, letting the day's weight press down on her. The framed photograph of her parents stared back from the nightstand, smiling, proud, unaware of how far their daughter had drifted from the path they once believed was destiny. She missed them more than she let herself admit. She reached for her planner, out of habit, more than purpose, and thumbed through the pages that once brimmed with color-coded meetings, client calls, and quiet triumphs. Now the days ahead were mainly blank, mostly. Tomorrow, she had one final interview scheduled at a mid-sized tech firm in the West Loop. Nothing glamorous, nothing close to what she'd been doing for Ethan. But work was work, and she needed to feel useful again like herself. She tucked the planner under her pillow and lay back, letting the city hum, lull her to sleep. But even in dreams, she wasn't free. She found herself standing once more in front of Ethan's desk, the massive oak barrier between them. His expression was distant. Her voice was steady. Too steady. The words, "You're fired," hung like smoke she couldn't breathe through. She woke with a start. Morning light was beginning to stretch across the ceiling. Her skin was damp with sweat, and her heart was pounding like it had been racing for miles. She sat up, wiped her face, and whispered to no one, "You're okay. You're okay." And somehow, she was. Bruised, but not broken. That afternoon, Ethan attended a meeting he didn't remember scheduling. He sat at the head of the long conference table, staring blankly at quarterly revenue projections, nodding at presentations he didn't absorb. The room buzzed around him with efficiency, but his mind drifted elsewhere. He wondered what Layla was doing, whether she was okay, whether she hated him. When the meeting ended, he dismissed everyone with a clipped "thank you," then remained seated long after emptying the room. He reached for his phone more than once, but his thumb hovered over her name each time and fell back in defeat. She had been different. Not just competent, though she had been brilliant. Not just reliable, though she had held his world together for years. No. Layla Brooks had seen him, seen him, and treated him like a person, not a billionaire, not a project, not a prize. She had never once tried to impress him, and perhaps that was what impressed him most. Back in her apartment, Layla returned from the final interview with no expectations. The man had been kind enough, and the office was modest but clean. Still, something in his tone told her they were looking for someone less overqualified, or perhaps less controversial. She knew the drill by now. She placed her keys on the counter, slipped off her shoes, and sat silently. It was strange how noise could be so overwhelming in the office, and how its absence could feel like loneliness in a place that was supposed to be home. She reached for the remote, but paused when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Ms. Brooks?" a calm male voice said. "This is Jonathan Parks from Lancaster Enterprises. Mr. Whitmore would like to schedule a meeting." Layla's heart froze. The pause was so long, Jonathan added quickly, "If you're not available—" "No," she cut in, her voice clipped. Controlled. "I'm available. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. His office." She hung up without saying goodbye. She sat perfectly still for several minutes, the phone resting in her lap, her breath shallow. She wasn't sure if she wanted to scream or laugh. Ethan Whitmore wanted to see her, and she had no idea why. But she would go. Not for him, for herself, for the woman who had walked out with her pride intact and deserved to be heard, no matter how it ended. The morning air outside Lancaster Enterprises carried a chill that didn't match the season. It wasn't the cold that clung to Layla's skin. It was something more profound. A quiet apprehension pulsed beneath the surface of her calm exterior as she stood facing the glass tower she had once entered with purpose. Today, her purpose was different. She adjusted the cuff of her navy coat, squared her shoulders, and stepped through the revolving doors. Each footfall echoed with quiet defiance against the memory of the last time she had walked these halls. Empty-handed, hollow-hearted. Now, she carried nothing but her name and her silence. The receptionist looked up, surprise flickering, before she offered a courteous nod. "Ms. Brooks, Mr. Whitmore is expecting you." Of course he was. Layla took the elevator in silence, the metal walls reflecting her face at her in pieces. Fragments of confidence, resilience, and the fatigue that came with pretending you didn't care. The quiet hit her first when the doors opened to the executive floor. Not the sterile quiet of corporate formality, but the heavy hush of something waiting to happen. She walked to his office without hesitation, heels steady on marble. The assistant outside his door gave her a tight smile and knocked twice before opening it. "He's ready for you." Layla stepped inside. The room hadn't changed. Same towering windows, same understated luxury, same scent of aged wood and crisp air conditioning. But Ethan Whitmore, standing by the window, his back to her, was not the same man who had fired her without flinching. "Layla," he said, his voice lower than she remembered, less confident. She said nothing, waited. He turned, and for a moment, their eyes met, and something passed between them. Not anger, not warmth, just history, tense and fragile. "Thank you for coming," he said. Layla folded her arms. "Let's not waste time." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He walked toward his desk slowly, as if choosing every movement with care. He didn't sit. Neither did she. "I owe you an apology," he began. "No," she interrupted, her voice cool. "You owe me an explanation." He exhaled, an honest breath. "The contract. It was tampered with. You didn't make the mistake." Layla blinked once, then twice. "You're sure?" "Yes." He paused. Security logs confirmed it. "And how long have you known?" she asked quietly. His silence was answer enough. She looked away, jaw clenched. "So you let me walk out? Let my name be dragged through meetings, interviews, and gossip. For what? To save face?" "I didn't know how to undo it," he said, voice taut. "I realized too late." "You realized the moment I walked out that door." That silenced him again. She was right, and they both knew it. She turned to go. "Wait." She stopped, but didn't look at him. "I want you to come back." The words were quiet, but struck like a stone dropped into still water. She turned then, slowly. "To what? The job I lost? The trust that's already broken?" "Not as my assistant," he said. "That role never fit your brilliance. I want you as my consultant, independent, with full authority to challenge me, advise, and reshape this company with me." Layla stared at him for a long, still moment. It was the kind of offer people dreamed of. Power, recognition, autonomy. But it came from the same man who hadn't believed her when it mattered. "Why?" she asked. His voice dropped lower. "Because I trust you now." "Now," she repeated, like the word tasted bitter on her tongue. "What changed?" He didn't look away. "Losing you." The room was too quiet, too intimate. It wasn't just about work anymore, and they both felt it. Layla looked toward the window. The city moved below them, fast and unbothered. Her thoughts weren't so easily swayed. She turned back, eyes clear. "I don't forgive easily," she said. "I'm not asking for that," Ethan replied. "I'm asking for the chance to show you who I should have been from the beginning." Layla's heart beat faster than she wanted it to, not because of the offer, but because she saw it in his eyes. Regret, but something else too, something quieter, something unspoken. "I need time," she said finally. "Take all you need." She nodded, turned, and walked out the door without another word. And for the first time since she had left, Ethan didn't feel like the man in control. He felt like a man waiting. The next morning, Layla stood at the edge of her kitchen counter, coffee cooling beside her, phone in hand. The offer still echoed in her thoughts. Consultant, autonomy, a voice that mattered. But power wasn't the answer to everything. She thought of the nights she had doubted herself, the days she had walked into interviews. She already knew the outcome. The way her mother's voice used to say, "Make them listen, baby girl." Not with noise, but with proof. Proof. She would go back not because she needed to, but because she deserved to. Not as the woman who was wronged, but as the woman who would rewrite the rules. She picked up her phone. "I'll see you Monday," the message read. And somewhere, in a corner office above the clouds, Ethan exhaled, not in relief, in reverence. Monday morning arrived with clarity that didn't beg for fanfare. Layla stood in front of the mirror in her small apartment, hands steady as she pinned the final curl behind her ear. Her outfit was simple. Tailored slate gray trousers, a crisp white blouse, heels that made her feel taller than she was. No flash, no need. Her presence would speak for itself now. The woman looking back at her wasn't the same person who had walked away with a cardboard box clutched to her chest. That Layla had been gutted, gracefully, yes, but gutted all the same. This Layla? She had already bled. Now she wore armor made of silence and purpose. She arrived at Lancaster Enterprises without hesitation. The security guard at the front desk, Carl, recognized her instantly. "Ms. Brooks," he said with a startled half-smile. "It's good to see you again." She nodded once, softly. "You too, Carl." The elevator ride was quiet, but it wasn't hollow this time. It pulsed with something more. A subtle anticipation. A shift in air pressure just before a storm. Not the destructive kind, but the kind that clears the sky afterward. The doors opened onto the executive floor and eyes turned. Eyes. Familiar faces. Some warm, some wary. They watched her, curious, uncertain. Some were still whispering. Layla didn't slow her stride. She wasn't here for approval. She was here for reckoning. Ethan's assistant ushered her in without a word, her expression unreadable. He was already standing when she walked in. Behind his desk, naturally, like a man both in command and caught off guard by his discomfort. His posture was impeccable, but his eyes gave him away. They softened the moment they landed on her. "Good morning," he said. Layla placed her bag beside the leather chair and looked around the office, as if seeing it for the first time. It had always been a cathedral of cool elegance. Charcoal furniture, clean lines, modern art carefully chosen to impress without emotion. But today, she wasn't here as an extension of his empire. She was here as a force in her own right. "I'll need my own office," she said, returning to him. He blinked, just once, then nodded. "Of course, and I want the project briefs on the Marotech merger sent to me directly. No gatekeeping. You'll have full access," he said evenly. She studied him for a moment. And your team? Do they know I'm not here to take coffee orders? They know, he said quietly. And if they don't, they will. Something in the air crackled faintly. Not tension, but the aftermath of it. Layla nodded once, then sat across from him without waiting to be invited. This wasn't a return. It was a redefinition. They began. They dissected operations, workflow, and investor concerns for the next hour. Layla asked questions no one else had dared to. She picked apart the numbers like a surgeon. Ethan listened more than he spoke, a rare thing for a man used to commanding rooms with a glance. At one point, as she reached across to grab a portfolio from the far corner of the desk, her fingers brushed his, only for a second. But the contact was enough to pause them both. Neither commented on it. When the meeting ended, she rose, gathered her notes, and turned toward the door. Layla. She stopped. He stood, slowly, and stepped out from behind the desk. For the first time, they faced each other without that solid barrier between them. I never told you. He began, then paused, like the words had to be chosen too carefully, or they'd break something between them. She waited. You were the reason this company stayed steady these last 5 years. Not just efficient. Steady. I didn't see it until after you left. Layla tilted her head, a quiet breath escaping her. That's the thing with seeing, Ethan. You have to want to. He didn't look away. I want to know. The honesty in his voice was disarming. She searched his face, looking for the man she had worked for all those years, the one buried beneath suits and silence. But he wasn't that man anymore. Or maybe he never had been. Perhaps she just hadn't allowed herself to look deeper. She didn't respond, just nodded once and walked out, her heels steady and unhurried. Later that afternoon, she found her new office, a minimalist corner suite flooded with light. The skyline stretched beyond the windows, sharp and infinite. Her desk was bare, save for a single silver pen resting in the center, the same pen he'd once given her. Layla picked it up slowly, turning it in her fingers. She could have ignored the gesture, could have dismissed it as nostalgia, as manipulation. But something told her it wasn't either. It was a beginning, not of forgiveness, but of understanding. In the days that followed, the office recalibrated around her. At first, there was tension, a new kind of wariness. Some executives were unsure how to treat her. Others challenged her authority subtly. Interruptions during meetings, sidelong glances when she spoke, undermining suggestions masked as questions. But Layla never raised her voice. She didn't need to. She knew the data better than they did, anticipated boardroom politics like she was writing the script herself. And when someone tried to silence her, she let her silence answer louder than words, backed by results that couldn't be ignored. By the end of the week, respect wasn't granted. It was earned. And Ethan? He watched, not with condescension, not even with admiration, but with something quieter, something that looked like awe. Late one evening, long after most of the staff had left, Layla was still at her desk, reading through proposals. The city glowed behind her in soft amber and gold. A knock came. She looked up. Ethan stood in the doorway, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. I wasn't sure how you took it, he said. I take it strong, she replied. He handed her the cup and leaned against the edge of her desk, not quite intruding or casual. She took a sip. It was exactly right. Thanks, she murmured. He nodded, then glanced around the office. You've already made this space yours. I never needed much, she said, just room to breathe. He was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, he said, I want to give you that. She didn't answer right away, but when their eyes met, something passed between them. A flicker, a hum, A pause that spoke of everything not yet said. And maybe, just maybe, a door not quite closed. The late spring rain fell gently against the glass walls of Lancaster Enterprises, drawing silver veins down the windows like tears the city was too proud to shed. Inside, the world was hushed. The usual chatter, footsteps, and distant hum of office life had softened under the weight of dusk. Layla remained at her desk, the office now cloaked in a dim, amber glow from the pendant lamp above her. A half-empty cup of black coffee sat forgotten by her keyboard, its warmth long gone, much like the tension she'd felt when she first walked back through those doors. In its place was something quieter, not peace, but familiarity, a growing rhythm between her and this place, between her and him. She was reading over a revised logistics report when a soft knock pulled her attention toward the door. Ethan. Of course. He didn't wait for her to invite him in. He never had, not even in the beginning. But now, his entrances felt less like interruptions and more like pauses. Gentle ones. Necessary. "You're still here," he said, voice lowered, as if speaking louder would ruin the moment. "I could say the same," she murmured without looking up. He smiled faintly and stepped inside, hands tucked into the pockets of his dark slacks. No tie tonight. The top button is undone, just the faintest edge of vulnerability showing beneath all that controlled elegance. "Long day?" he asked. Layla glanced up, tilting her head. "Is there any other kind in this building?" He chuckled, a low, restrained sound that made her chest flutter against her will. "I thought maybe you'd want a break," he said, then added, "Just a drive. Nothing formal." She leaned back slightly, one brow lifting. "A drive? No suits, no meetings. Just city lights, windows down, music that doesn't belong to a playlist called Productivity." Layla studied him for a moment. The offer hung in the air, subtle but potent. She could have declined. Should have. But something in the quiet way he looked at her felt disarming. She stood. "Give me 5 minutes." They drove in silence at first, Ethan's sleek black sedan gliding through the rain-slicked streets like a shadow. Chicago was luminous at night, skyscrapers stretching like silent sentinels into the misty sky, their reflections shimmering in puddles and on riverbanks. The city never truly slept, just softened its pulse when no one was watching. Layla leaned against the passenger window, her hair tucked behind one ear, eyes tracing the droplets that trailed down the glass. Ethan broke the silence. "You used to hum when you were working. Quiet, but constant." She glanced at him, surprised. "I didn't realize you noticed." "I noticed more than I let on," he said. A pause. "I also noticed how the entire floor moved smoothly when you were there, the way even the chaos had order when you touched it." Layla exhaled slowly. "You're committed to this redemption arc, huh?" His lips curved, but the amusement didn't quite reach his eyes. "No, just the truth. Late, maybe, but true." They passed a bridge, its steel beams rising like ribs from the river below. A street musician stood in a shadowed corner beneath, playing jazz from a battered saxophone, the notes curling through the night like smoke. "Pull over," she said suddenly. Ethan blinked. "Here? Just do it." He obeyed without question. She stepped out before he could reach her door, walking toward the edge of the bridge. The rain had turned to mist, soft and warm on her skin. Below, the river moved dark and unhurried, mirroring the sky. Ethan joined her after a beat, standing a step behind. Layla didn't speak right away. She let the moment breathe. Then, quietly, "I used to come here during my lunch breaks, on days when things got heavy." He looked at her then. Why here? She shrugged, arms crossed loosely. It's honest. The city's always honest at night. You can't pretend here. It doesn't let you. He nodded, hands resting on the railing. I get that. They stood like that for a while, side by side. No masks, no pretense. Just the soft hush of the wind and the gentle sound of water below them. When she finally turned to face him, her voice was softer. You hurt me, Ethan. His throat tightened. I know. Not just the firing, she continued, but the doubt. I worked every day to make things seamless for you, to keep your world from falling apart. And the one time I needed you to believe in me, you didn't. His gaze didn't waver. I did believe in you, Layla. I didn't trust myself enough to admit it. She blinked. That's not the same thing. No, he whispered. It's not. A car passed behind them, headlights sweeping the water like a spotlight, but neither of them moved. I've been in control for so long, he said, almost to himself. Built a life on decisions, on clarity. But with you, everything felt different, and that scared me more than I was willing to admit. Layla looked at him, truly looked. There was no performance here. Just a man finally learning how to be seen. Fear doesn't excuse betrayal, she said gently. No, it doesn't, he agreed. But honesty is a start. He took a slow breath. Then let me say it clearly. I see you now. I see everything I missed, and I regret not seeing it sooner. Her heart beat louder in her chest than she liked, but she didn't turn away. I don't know what this is, she admitted. Not yet. I don't know if it's forgiveness, or something else entirely. You don't have to know, Ethan said. Just don't shut the door all the way. Layla held his gaze for a long, quiet moment. Then, softly, almost without thinking, she reached for his hand. Their fingers met in the space between silence and speech. No grand gesture. Just touch. Just warmth. Just a beginning that asked for nothing but the chance to become something more. And beneath the soft hiss of rain, the city whispered its quiet approval. The following weeks settled into a rhythm neither of them had anticipated. It wasn't the routine that surprised Layla. It was how her body began to recognize Ethan's presence before her mind permitted it. The sound of his footsteps outside her door, the subtle pause before he spoke her name, the way his fingers tapped once, always once, before he knocked. They kept things professional on paper, but real life didn't fit inside paper lines. Their days were filled with meetings and reports, strategic disagreements, and long silences punctuated by glances that lasted too long to be casual. She challenged him more than anyone ever had, and he, curiously, infuriatingly, never pushed back. Not in the old way. He listened. He adjusted. It made things more complicated. Because it wasn't just about trust anymore. It was about noticing. The way his sleeves rolled up when he was thinking deeply. The way he paused, fingers hovering above a glass of bourbon, when something she said made him reconsider everything. The quiet pride in his eyes the first time she tore apart a proposal in front of the board, and everyone listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't interfere. He just watched and let her rise. And Layla? She hated how aware she was of him. Hated that her body knew the sound of his laugh before her brain registered the joke. Her breath caught in her throat whenever he stood too close, even when he only handed her a folder. That same folder now lay forgotten between them, sitting on the sleek conference table that had long since emptied of everyone else. Only they remained. The clock above the door had ticked past 9, but neither had acknowledged it. You're distracted, Ethan said finally, breaking the silence. Layla didn't look up. No more than usual. Liar, he said gently. She closed the folder, pushed it aside, and leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. We've been working 12-hour days. If I am distracted, it's because I'm human. Ethan gave a soft, almost amused smile. You forget I know you, Layla. You don't get distracted. You compartmentalize. And you don't? I used to. Their eyes locked across the table. It would have been easier if he'd looked away. It would have been easier if he'd kept that professional mask on. But Ethan had a habit now, one he hadn't had before, of looking at her like she was the only person who mattered in the room. And Layla, despite herself, wasn't immune. She stood, needing space, needing motion. We should call it a night. Ethan rose too, slowly. Probably. She turned to gather her things, but his voice followed her. Are you afraid of what's happening? Layla froze. Not because she hadn't anticipated it, but because she had. And it still hit harder than she wanted to admit. She turned around. Between us? Yes. Her breath left her in a quiet exhale. She leaned against the table, arms braced at the edge, anchoring herself in the moment. I don't know what this is, she said softly, not harshly, just honestly. And I'm not sure you do either. I know I look for you when you're not in the room, Ethan said. I know my day doesn't feel right until I hear your voice. And I know when you're near, nothing feels heavy. Layla's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. That's not the same as knowing what you want. I want you, he said. The words landed gently. No urgency, no pressure. Just the truth, sitting between them like a candle refusing to flicker. Layla met his eyes. Wanting me is easy. Choosing me? That's something else. Ethan stepped closer, but not too close. Just enough that she could feel his presence warming the air between them. I choose you every time, he said, even when I didn't know it yet. Silence stretched between them. Not cold, not tense, just full. Layla looked away, but only for a second. When she looked back, her voice was steadier than she felt. You hurt me. I know. And I don't know if I'm ready to trust what this is. I won't ask you to, he said. I'll earn it. Slowly, if I have to. A pause. A heartbeat. I'm not good at slow, she murmured. I think you are, he said quietly. You just don't like what it reveals. Layla turned her head slightly, studying him. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't playing a game. There was no hint of the icy executive she'd once worked under. Only Ethan, the man, the flawed one, the one trying. You should go home, she said. So should you. I will. He nodded, but didn't move. Not yet. And neither did she. Eventually, Ethan stepped away. He walked to the door and touched it, but paused before opening it. I'll see you tomorrow, he said, without turning around. Layla nodded. You always do. And with that, he left. She remained in the conference room for a long time, staring at the folder, the empty coffee cup, and the dimming light beyond the window. It was happening, whether she wanted it or not. Not love, not yet, but something that came before it, dangerous in its softness, slow in its certainty. A wanting that didn't ask. It waited. And for the first time, Layla wasn't sure she could outrun it. It began with small things. Not declarations, not admissions. Just the gestures that slipped through routine cracks and quietly settled beneath the surface. Layla would arrive at the office to find her favorite tea on her desk. Ethan would push meetings 5 minutes late so she wouldn't have to rush from one floor to another. She never asked for any of it. He never mentioned doing it. But the silence between them started to speak louder than their words. The air in their shared spaces had gradually shifted like a tide that had turned without warning. It wasn't charged in the way a new attraction usually felt. No sparks, no flirtation. It was warmer, steadier, like something that had taken root long ago and was only now beginning to bloom. That Thursday, rain returned to the city like an old friend, soft, persistent, and rhythmically unpredictable. The streets blurred beneath it, the sky an uninterrupted wash of silver. From Layla's office, the world looked distant, softened by glass and weather. She reviewed strategy reports, her pen moving in slow, thoughtful loops, when there was a soft knock. Ethan didn't wait to be invited in. He walked in with a familiarity that should have bothered her, but didn't. He was holding 2 takeout bags, the aroma of something warm and spiced escaping from within. "You haven't eaten," he said. Layla looked up, brows raised. "That's not in your job description." "I added it this morning," he replied, placing the bags on the table by the window. She watched him with a trace of suspicion, but curiosity softened her edges. She stood, walked over, and peeked inside. "Indian?" she asked. "You mentioned once you liked garlic naan when you were tired, and that vindaloo reminded you of your father." She blinked. "That was months ago. I remember things," he said, without looking at her. For a moment, the only sound was the gentle hum of the rain outside and the paper rustling as they unpacked the meal. They sat at the small table, the city a blur behind them. They ate in silence at first, but it was the kind of silence Layla had grown to find. Safe. Not empty, just shared. Midway through the meal, Ethan looked up. "You've stopped humming." She tilted her head. "Excuse me? You used to hum when you worked." Softly. "I didn't realize I missed it until it was gone." Layla stared at him momentarily, unsure whether the flutter in her chest was annoyance or something dangerously close to affection. "I haven't had much to hum about," she said quietly. His eyes didn't leave hers. "I'd like to change that." The statement hung in the air. Gentle, honest, no rush. But it pressed against something tender inside her. Something she hadn't been ready to name. She looked down at her plate. "Why now, Ethan?" "Because I was afraid before," he said. "Of being seen, of caring, of not knowing how to give someone what they deserved. And now?" He hesitated. "Now I'm still afraid. But I don't want that to be what defines me anymore." Layla leaned back slightly, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. She was quiet for a long moment. "I've spent my whole life earning space in rooms where people assumed I didn't belong," she said, "and I got good at making myself small enough to stay. But you always saw everything I brought to the table. And still, when it mattered most, you hesitated." Ethan's voice was low. "I know. I'm not saying this to wound you," she added. "I just need you to understand what you're asking. If I open this door, it doesn't come without cost." "I'm not asking you to open it tonight," he said. "Just don't lock it." Her throat tightened, but she nodded. Just barely. They didn't talk after that. The food grew cold. The rain continued. And when Ethan stood to leave, he didn't reach for her hand, didn't try to cross the space between them. He looked at her one last time, something tender and unresolved in his gaze. "I'll see you tomorrow." Layla watched him walk out, and for the first time in a long time, she realized the walls she'd built to protect herself weren't made of stone anymore. They were softer now, and slowly, impossibly, starting to let the light in. That night, she couldn't sleep. The apartment was quiet. Her bed was warm, but her thoughts refused to obey the stillness. She kept thinking of him, the way his voice dipped when he said her name, of how he'd remembered garlic naan and her father in the same breath. She reached for her phone once, then returned it without unlocking it. No, she wouldn't be the first to reach out. Not yet. But as she closed her eyes, she whispered into the dark, so low even the night couldn't overhear. "You scare me too." And somehow, the truth of it didn't feel like a weakness. It felt like the beginning of something real. It was nearly midnight when the last email went out. Layla sat curled on the leather sofa in Ethan's private office, a blanket she didn't remember asking for draped lightly over her legs, and the glow of the city bleeding through the windows like a dream too restless to end. She hadn't meant to fall asleep. Not in this space. Not after all the lines she'd spent weeks drawing and redrawing between them. But exhaustion didn't ask for permission. The room was still, silent, except for the occasional shuffle of wind against glass and the hum of a building too tall to sleep. Her breathing was soft, even. Her face turned slightly toward the window as if dreaming of somewhere far from polished floors and high-rise ceilings. Ethan watched her from the desk. He should have gone home. He should have turned off the lights and let the moment end the way it always had. Him walking away, keeping distance, clinging to discipline like it held him together. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was how her body looked so small in the oversized leather couch. Perhaps it was the faint smudge of eyeliner beneath her eyes, the remnants of a long day that had asked too much and offered too little. Or maybe it was this. He hadn't realized how much of her presence he'd come to rely on, until she'd gone quiet. He stood slowly, careful not to make a sound, crossed the room in deliberate silence, and then, without thinking, he removed his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. Her brow furrowed briefly, her lips parting slightly as she shifted, but she didn't wake. Ethan crouched beside the couch, the polished marble floor cool against his knees. From this close, she looked not fragile. Layla was never fragile, but unguarded. All the sharp, brilliant edges of her softened into rest. He reached up, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. His fingers barely brushed her skin. And still, it felt like something sacred. For a moment, he just looked at her. Not the woman who challenged him in boardrooms. Not the strategist who dissected corporate puzzles faster than anyone else in the room. Just Layla, the woman who hummed under her breath when she thought no one was listening. Who took her coffee too strong. Who forgave slowly, loved carefully, and carried herself like she had nothing left to prove. Ethan didn't know when it had started, this quiet ache whenever she wasn't near. But now that it had taken hold, it was all he could feel. His voice was barely more than a breath. "I think I'm falling for you." She didn't stir, didn't answer, but something inside him did something old and heavy and buried beneath years of power and distance. And for once, Ethan Whitmore didn't run from it. Layla woke slowly. She wasn't sure what pulled her out of sleep. Maybe the shift in the room's energy, perhaps the echo of a dream she couldn't quite remember. The blanket slid slightly as she sat up, her fingers catching on the sleeve of Ethan's jacket. Her heart skipped. She looked around, blinking against the dim lighting. The office was quiet, but warm. Her phone on the table buzzed once, with a missed notification. It was 12:43 a.m. She turned toward the desk. Empty. But the lamp was still on, and a cup of tea was resting on the edge, steaming, as if recently placed there. She stood, slowly, the jacket still wrapped around her. It smelled like him. Clean, subtle, expensive. She hated how much comfort it brought. The door creaked as she stepped into the hallway. Ethan was in the break room down the corridor, sleeves rolled, back slightly hunched as he leaned over the counter. He looked up as she entered, eyes widening slightly. "You're awake." "I wasn't planning on falling asleep," she said, clearing her throat. "I figured," he replied, nodding toward the tea. Chamomile. Her brow lifted. You don't drink chamomile. It's not for me. The room fell into a soft, awkward silence. She held the jacket tighter around her. You stayed. He met her gaze. You fell asleep on a couch in a locked office 60 floors above the city. I wasn't going to leave you alone. You could have woken me. I didn't want to. His voice was quiet but resolute. She took a breath and leaned against the doorframe. You said something when you thought I was sleeping. His posture stiffened, but only for a second. Did I? Layla nodded. I wasn't fully awake, but I heard it. Ethan's jaw flexed. Then I guess I don't need to repeat it. You could, she said. Not a challenge, not a demand, just space. He looked at her, then looked, and whatever shield he'd kept between them slipped just a little more. I think I'm falling for you, he repeated, this time with no whisper, no doubt. Layla held his gaze, her heart unsteady. And she didn't run. She didn't deflect. She slowly stepped into the room until she stood inches from him. That's dangerous, she said softly. I know. I'm still angry. You should be. And scared. I am too. A long, thick silence stretched between them. She reached up then, fingers brushing his collar as if testing the truth of him. Not just his words, but the man beneath. And then, without ceremony, without announcement, she rested her head lightly against his chest. Not a kiss, not a promise. Just the quiet surrender of a woman letting herself be held by a man who'd finally decided to stay. Ethan's arms closed around her, and his weight didn't feel so heavy for the first time. It should have been a quiet morning, the kind that drifts in like a secret, calm and pale, with coffee brewing in the background and the hum of traffic still distant enough to feel imaginary. But that Monday, everything about the day arrived wrong, sharper at the edges, unspoken tension coiled between hallway glances and conversations that didn't finish. Layla could feel it when she stepped into the elevator, an energy too still to be natural, like the air before a storm. Her phone buzzed twice with unread notifications from the executive team, each more vague and clipped than the last. She didn't like vagueness, didn't trust the clip. When she reached the 60th floor, Anna, the receptionist, barely met her eyes. The usual good morning was replaced by a tight smile and a glance toward Ethan's office. Something was wrong, and she hated that her first thought wasn't about the company, it was about him. The boardroom was full. 12 senior executives, one outside consultant she didn't recognize, and Ethan, seated at the head of the table, his expression as unreadable as stone. His posture was perfect, composed, but his fingers tapped against the wood in a steady, silent rhythm. Layla had only ever seen him when he tried not to lose control. She stepped in without knocking. If the tension bothered her, she didn't show it. Ethan looked up, just briefly. Their eyes met. Something passed between them. Something that felt like an apology, but also a warning. Ms. Carter, he said formally, please take a seat. She did, sliding into the empty chair to his left, the only seat he'd left open. The consultant, a man with silver hair and a voice like glass, began a presentation that felt too polished, too rehearsed. Terms like cost restructuring, asset reassessment, and divisional realignment were tossed across the room like lifeboats, each one landing harder than the last. And then came the words Layla had been dreading without knowing she'd been dreading them. We recommend reevaluating the leadership dynamics within strategy and operations. Layla blinked once, then again. Her department, her team, her. Ethan said nothing. The silence was louder than the rest of the room combined. It ended as quickly as it began. Polite nods, tense goodbyes, half-hearted gratitude for time well spent. The room cleared, and Layla stayed seated, fingers still wrapped around the pen she hadn't used once. Ethan remained too. Only when the last door clicked shut did she speak. Leadership dynamics? He leaned back in his chair, eyes closed for a breath too long. I didn't approve it, he said, but you didn't stop it either. His jaw tensed. It's a broad directive. That consultant. Who hired him? A vote was passed last Friday. I didn't know until this morning. Layla stood, pacing toward the window, arms crossed tightly. Her voice was low, but laced with heat. You promised me transparency, Ethan. And you have it now, he said quietly. She turned. Do I? He met her gaze. You think I would have let this happen if I had a choice? I don't know, she said, the words trembling just enough to sting. You've made many decisions behind closed doors, and I've learned to live with that. But this? You knew what it would look like. What would it feel like? I was trying to buy time, he admitted. If I pushed back, it would have drawn more attention to us, more scrutiny. To us, she repeated. Right. And there it was, the line. She'd hoped they'd been walking toward each other all this time, but now she saw it. Ethan had been standing still, hoping she'd cross alone. He rose from his chair slowly, voice low. Layla, please, don't turn this into something it's not. What is it then? She asked, throat tight. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like self-preservation. He flinched, just slightly. You know that's not true. She stepped closer, but not out of softness. Out of the fire. Do I? Because I believe you when I'm in your office late at night, when you tell me things you won't even admit to yourself in daylight. I believe that version of you. But this? She gestured to the table, the echo of that sterile meeting still heavy in the air. This is who the rest of the world sees. And I don't know how long I can keep pretending I don't see it too. The room fell into a silence so still it became its kind of noise. Ethan looked at her like he wanted to reach for her, but knew better than to try. You don't have to choose between the company and me, he said quietly. Yes, I do, she replied, because one of us already has. She turned before he could answer, walked out, didn't look back. That night, the rain returned, steadier now, less forgiving. Layla sat alone in her apartment, Ethan's jacket still draped over the back of her dining chair, untouched. Her phone vibrated twice with messages she didn't open. She poured a glass of wine, took one sip, couldn't finish it. The city pulsed outside her window, lights blinking in rhythm with a heart she didn't recognize as hers. And for the first time since she'd walked back into his office all those weeks ago, she wondered if being seen by him had ever truly meant being safe. Because sometimes, love isn't what fails. It's courage that runs out first. The days followed were filled with silence that pressed down like fog, dense, invisible, and impossible to shake. Layla arrived at work early and left late. Not because the deadlines demanded it, but because her presence had become a shield, a wall of professionalism. She rebuilt each morning like armor. Her smiles were polite, her comments clipped, her emails impeccable. No one could say she was falling apart, because no one could see her anymore. Not how he used to. Ethan, for his part, stayed behind his glass walls. He watched, but never interrupted. He spoke in meetings only when necessary, and when he did, his voice carried none of its usual certainty. It was quieter now, more measured. Like something had shifted in him, too. But Layla no longer cared to decipher whether it was regret or restraint. The absence of everything that had once existed between them hurt the most. The unspoken understanding, the charged glances, the slow, careful unfolding of trust. Now it was just air, just reports and board memos, just two people pretending not to have history that ached like bruises under tailored clothing. It was on a Wednesday afternoon that the email landed in her inbox. Simple. Subject: proposal draft. Urgent. Sent by his assistant. No message body. No hint of anything personal. Layla opened the attached file and prepared to skim until she saw it wasn't a proposal. It was a letter, not addressed, not signed, but every word unmistakably his. You once told me you didn't believe in people changing overnight. That transformation comes slowly, one small decision at a time, like light bleeding into a dark room. I never understood what you meant until now. I've spent my entire life measuring people in terms of usefulness, timing, and loyalty. Everything had a price, even affection, even closeness. But then there was you. You never demanded anything from me. You just showed up. And that terrified me more than anything else. Because the only thing harder than being alone was realizing I didn't want to be anymore. I hurt you by hesitating. I broke something by thinking I could have you in the quiet without owning you in the light. And if you never speak to me again, I'll understand. But I wanted you to know. I remember how you tilt your head when you don't believe me. I remember you carry 2 sets of keys, one for your apartment, one for your mother's house. I remember the song you hummed under your breath the day you rewrote the entire brand strategy in 2 hours flat. I remember everything, Layla, even the silences, especially the silences. She stared at the screen for a long time, her pulse steady but slow, like her body hadn't yet caught up with what her heart already knew. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't even an apology. It was something quieter, more dangerous. It was true. And Layla didn't know what to do with that. She didn't respond. Not that day, not the next. But on Friday evening, Layla stood by the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city as the office emptied and the sun sank into the buildings. She clutched her coat tighter, her phone still unread in her palm. Behind her, the office door opened. Footsteps. Then stillness. She didn't need to turn to know it was him. Ethan's voice was soft, roughened by something she couldn't quite name. I shouldn't have sent that. Layla's back remained to him. But you did. I didn't know how else to say it. You could have said it before the board met. I was afraid, he said. I was too, she admitted. He took one step closer, then another. Careful, respectful. I never wanted to protect the company more than I wanted to protect you, he said. But I didn't know how to do both, and I chose wrong. She turned slowly, eyes meeting his. For the first time in weeks, they didn't look like strangers. They looked like something unfinished. Ethan's voice broke slightly. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not ready to give it, she said, but her tone had no ice. Just weariness. Truth. I just wanted to see you, he said. Not the strategist, not the professional. Just you. Layla exhaled, closing the space between them by one step. I'm still angry. I deserve that. I don't trust you fully. I'll wait. I don't know what this is anymore. I'm still trying to figure it out too, he whispered. She looked at him for a long moment, past the tailored suit, the polished shoes, the man who once ruled every room by calculation alone. And in his place, she saw something else. A man trying, flawed, hesitant, but finally, undeniably real. She reached up, just lightly, fingertips brushing his collar. I don't need you to fix anything tonight, she said. I just need to know you won't run when it gets hard. I won't, Ethan said. And this time, Layla believed him. Not because he said it, but he looked like he meant it, even if it took every broken part of him to get the words out. The city lit up behind them, and in that quiet office, as the lights dimmed and the hallway hushed, two people stood side by side, not as CEO and strategist, not as past and present, but as something new, something beginning again. Not louder, just closer. And sometimes that was enough. They didn't fall back into each other. There were no sweeping gestures, no cinematic confessions on rooftops. It was just a series of small moments, each so quiet it would have gone unnoticed by anyone else. But for Ethan and Layla, they were everything. She started humming again, softly, absently, while reviewing briefs in the late afternoon. Ethan didn't mention it. He didn't have to. He paused when he heard it, every time, letting the sound pull him gently back into the present. He no longer sent late-night emails. Instead, he left handwritten notes folded neatly on her desk. Sometimes it was a quote. Other times, just a single sentence that read like a thought he hadn't dared say aloud. Don't lose that fire. Even when it burns me, I'd rather feel it than be cold again. She never replied to the notes, but she never threw them away either. One night, after a board meeting that ran too long and left them both raw with exhaustion, they found themselves in the back of the company car, riding in silence. Rain blurred the city outside. Neither had spoken since the meeting adjourned, and the quiet between them wasn't hostile. It wasn't even awkward. It was tired, honest. Ethan finally spoke, voice low. You were right. Layla turned slightly toward him. About what? About courage. He didn't elaborate. She didn't press. She looked at him, and saw a man unraveling slowly, but intentionally. Not in weakness, in surrender, in trust. The car stopped at her building. She moved to open the door, then hesitated. Do you want to come up? It wasn't an invitation. It was a test, not of love, of patience. Ethan met her eyes. Not yet. And in that refusal, she heard something more sincere than if he'd said yes. She nodded once, got out, and walked inside with her heart strangely full. The following weekend, they found themselves at the same charity event. Different arrivals, same ballroom. Ethan was in a black, tailored tuxedo with all sharp lines and quiet confidence. Layla wore a midnight blue gown, her hair coiled at the nape of her neck, earrings that caught the light whenever she tilted her head. They hadn't planned to meet there. But the moment he saw her across the room, everything else receded. She laughed at something someone said, and Ethan couldn't remember ever seeing her like that in public. Unguarded, brilliant, entirely unaware of his gaze. He waited until she stepped away from the crowd before approaching. Layla. She turned. Their eyes met, and something softened between them instantly. You clean up well, she said. So do you. A pause. Then, do you want to walk with me? She didn't say yes. She just started walking. They found a balcony tucked away at the edge of the ballroom. String lights flickered above them, and the city below looked like a painting undone by gold and noise. Ethan leaned against the railing. I keep thinking about something you said that night, about earning space in rooms where people think you don't belong. Layla glanced at him. I've been in 1,000 rooms, he continued, and I've commanded most of them, but I've never had to earn them, not the way you have. And now, I'm starting to wonder if I ever truly deserve the seats I filled. She watched him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said, There's a difference between being given space and being welcomed. You can't always control how you get in, but you can decide what you do once you're there. I want to do better, he said. Not just with you, with everything. Her voice was quiet. Doing better isn't about being perfect. Then I'm halfway there, he murmured. She laughed, soft, unexpected. And for a while, they stood like that. Quiet, easy, no roles, no performances, just Ethan and Layla. Just two people found their way back to something neither had language for. Later that night, she sent him a photo. It wasn't a selfie. It was of a ceramic mug, handmade, slightly chipped at the rim, filled with steaming tea and resting on her kitchen table. Underneath, a text. You forgot your jacket here last time. I kept it. It smells like rain in you. Ethan stared at the message longer than he should have, then replied, I'm glad you didn't return it. Some things are better left closed, and it wasn't love yet. Not the kind that explodes or rushes, but it was real. It was unfolding, and that quiet, it meant everything. Somewhere between the way he waited for her to finish speaking in meetings and how she remembered how he liked his espresso, 1 sugar, no cream, something began to settle. Not loudly, not with declarations, but with the kind of steadiness that only comes when two people finally stop reaching for what they want and start recognizing what they already have. Still, there were things they didn't talk about, not because they didn't matter, but because they mattered too much. And in that silence, something subtle shifted again. On a Tuesday morning, Layla walked into Ethan's office before the sun had fully climbed past the skyline. She held 2 coffees, set one on his desk, and placed a folder beside it. He glanced up, catching the hesitation in her eyes before she turned to leave. What is it? He asked. She paused, hand on the door. It's a new proposal, expansion strategy. It includes contingency plans. For what? For me. His throat tightened. He picked up the folder slowly, thumbing through the pages. Each section is precise. Her work, consistently brilliant. But this felt different, final. Like a goodbye, dressed in bullet points and projections. When he looked up, she was already gone. The week moved forward with the same rhythm, meetings, reports, polite exchanges, but the ground had shifted underneath. Ethan found himself watching her more often, as if searching for signs. She was calm, too calm, and that worried him more than anger ever could. Late one night, as he stood at the window of his penthouse, city lights flickering like restless thoughts, he decided. Not the kind driven by fear or damage control, but the kind that came from something more profound, something honest. The next morning, Layla arrived to find a note on her desk. Not typed, handwritten, neat, intentional. There's a property in upstate New York. It's quiet, surrounded by trees that forget the noise of the city. I bought it 5 years ago and never set foot in it. Too still, I thought. It was too far from everything that made me feel important. But now, I'd like to hear what it sounds like when everything stops. Come with me. Just for a weekend. No business. No strategy decks. Just you, me, and silence that doesn't feel like a punishment. She folded the note gently, ran her fingers along the crease. No logo, no agenda. Just him, unarmored. They left that Friday. The drive was long enough to allow for comfort, but not discomfort. The landscape changed as the city fell away. Buildings replaced by evergreens. Concrete softened by leaves still tinged with the last hues of autumn. They spoke, but sparingly, letting music fill the spaces that used to be filled with negotiation and caution. When they arrived, the house was just as he'd described, modern, modest, and surrounded by trees that swayed like they had nothing to prove. Inside, everything smelled of cedar and something faintly like books. Layla stood in the center of the living room, spinning once slowly. "This place doesn't feel like you," she said. Ethan chuckled. "It didn't. But maybe I'm starting to feel like it." That night, after a dinner she insisted on cooking, he awkwardly helped with burning the garlic, ruining one pan. They sat by the fireplace, wine in hand. No TV, no laptops, just the crackle of wood and the hum of breath. "Why now?" she asked finally, not looking at him. "Why what? Why ask me here now, after everything?" He swirled his wine, watching the flamelight bend across the glass. "Because I realized I keep trying to fix things with plans, with logic. But you're not a problem to solve, Layla, and we're not a project." Her eyes softened, lashes lowering slightly. "You say that like you haven't built empires out of control your whole life." "I have," he admitted. "But none of it ever held me the way you do when you're just breathing next to me." Silence fell again, but this time, it wasn't tense. It was thick with recognition. She set her glass down, shifted closer. "I never asked you to change for me," she said. "I know. And I never expected you to stay still." "I won't," he whispered, "but I'll stay with you." She leaned into his side then, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm wrapping instinctively around her. No kiss, no pretense, just warmth, presence. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't feel like he had to earn anything. Not her time, not her trust, not even her silence. Because in that moment, it belonged to both of them. And it was enough. The second night in the cabin unfolded without orchestration. No special plans, no curated playlists, no wine glasses clinking in the background. The soft rustle of trees beyond the window, a wool blanket shared across the couch, and the smooth, hesitant beat of two hearts adjusting to the unfamiliar rhythm of stillness. Layla stood barefoot in the kitchen, hair loosely braided down her back, stirring a pot of something slow and aromatic. She didn't look over her shoulder when she heard Ethan's footsteps behind her, but the softening in her posture gave her away. "You never cook at home," she said. Ethan leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "That's because no one taught me how not to burn everything. You're rich enough to have chefs on call." "Maybe I wanted to learn anyway." She smiled to herself. "You say that like it's simple." He moved beside her, quietly picking up a knife and dicing aside the tomatoes she'd left. She didn't stop him, didn't correct his uneven slices. She let him mess something up for the first time in their long, careful history without stepping in to perfect it. Later that night, the pot simmered gently on the stove while they sat cross-legged on the rug by the fireplace, a half-eaten bowl between them and their hands occasionally brushing as they reached for the same spoon. There were no rules in that room, no roles, just presence. Ethan watched Layla speak, her eyes glowing, her lips curling around each story from her childhood, college, and the years before their worlds collided. She didn't embellish, she didn't filter, and he didn't interrupt. He only listened, like he'd been starved for the sound of her honesty. When she paused, resting her chin on her knee, she caught him staring. "What?" "You," he said softly. "You feel more like home than any place I've ever lived." She held his gaze, not blinking. "And you feel more like a question I haven't answered yet." He smiled. "Is that a bad thing?" "No," she said, her voice quieter now. "Just unfamiliar, but not unwelcome." That was the moment. The shift. The breath between what had been and what might now become. The bed was too large for two people who pretended not to need each other. But they didn't pretend tonight. He pulled back the covers. She slid in first, the silence stretching but never breaking. When he joined her, his arm brushed hers and didn't retreat. Their bodies found a rhythm, not through touch, but through breath. The rise and fall, the stillness that wrapped around them was like something sacred. Hours passed without sleep, not because of worry, but because the night asked them to stay awake, to feel it, to recognize that sometimes intimacy wasn't about passion or whispers. Sometimes it was about staying, about not flinching when the other person turned vulnerable, about being there even when the light went out, and neither knew what the morning would bring. Around 3 a.m., Layla turned on her side, facing him. Her voice was barely above a murmur. "What do you want from this?" Ethan's eyes opened. He didn't rush the answer, didn't reach for a perfect sentence. "I want to stop performing," he said. "With you, I don't want to be the man who always knows the answer. I want to be the man who learns with you. Mess up. Tries again." She studied him. "And if I leave? Then I'll let you go," he whispered. "But I'll still be better for having known you." Her throat tightened. She blinked once, slowly. And then, so gently it almost didn't register, she reached for his hand under the blanket, laced her fingers with his, didn't say anything more, because the truth was already there, wrapped between their palms and the steady echo of their shared breath. He brought her hand to his lips, kissed the back of it, not like a man claiming something, but like a man thanking the moment for allowing it to happen. At sunrise, when the first light broke through the edge of the woods, Layla woke to find him still beside her. Not just physically, but present. No phone, no list of meetings, no morning alarm breaks the spell. Just Ethan. His arm draped over her waist. His breathing was even. His features were softer than the version of him the world always demanded. She watched him for a moment, then leaned in, pressed a kiss to his shoulder, barely there, barely a whisper. And in that second, she didn't care about the company, the projections, the strategy decks. She cared about this quiet, this skin, this warmth, this impossibly tender chapter between two people who had once known only how to keep distance as a means of control, and who now, in the middle of nowhere, had discovered that maybe closeness didn't have to be weakness. It could be their new beginning. When they returned to the city, everything was where they had left it. The skyline was still sharp and cold. The office was still efficient and sterile. The streets still hummed with the quiet urgency of ambition. However, Layla and Ethan were not the same people who had left 3 days before. It wasn't anything loud. They didn't hold hands in the lobby or exchange lingering glances at meetings. But those who paid attention might have noticed how their energies seemed to sink now, like the tide adjusting to the moon's pull, quiet, constant, impossible to ignore. Layla sat in her corner office on a Wednesday morning, reviewing market data. She wore her usual confidence like a tailored jacket but felt softer inside. Not fragile, just open, aware of her breath, aware of how his name tasted in her mouth, even if she didn't say it aloud. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Ethan stood at the door, not with his usual purposeful stride, but hesitantly, as if asking permission for something more than entry. "Do you have 5 minutes?" She nodded. "Only if you've learned how to dice tomatoes properly." He smiled, stepping inside, closed the door behind him. This time, he didn't sit across from her. He sat beside her, close, but not imposing. "I've been thinking," he began, fingers laced together, "about what this is, what we are." Layla raised a brow, calm. "You want to define it?" "I don't want to label it," he said, "but I want to honor it." She tilted her head, curious. "Honor?" I've spent years building things, companies, deals, reputations, but I've never built something I was willing to protect if it meant I had to slow down, step back, or be wrong. His voice grew quieter. Until now. Layla didn't interrupt. She let the words settle in the room like dust in sunlight. I want to build this with you, he said finally, carefully, deliberately, with all the mess and grace it deserves. Her response wasn't immediate. Instead, she closed her laptop, turned fully toward him, and asked, "Are you ready to be seen, Ethan? Not just respected, not just admired. Seen." He met her gaze, unflinching. "Yes, and I want to see you too. Not just the strategist, not the woman who keeps everything composed. I want to know what your silence sounds like when it's not armor." Layla felt something shift in her chest. Not break, unfold. She nodded once. "Okay," she said, "but no more late-night email ambushes." He chuckled. "Deal." Weeks passed. The city moved forward, unaware that something delicate was taking root in its busiest corners. They didn't rush. They didn't post about it or make it anyone's business. Instead, they lived in the spaces between calendar invites and stolen dinners, between soft laughter in the elevator and shared looks in the boardroom. She started leaving handwritten notes of her own. Once, she slipped a small card into his coat pocket before a major pitch. It said, "You don't need to convince them. You already are." Another time, he sent her a book of poetry with a single line underlined. "The most profound silence is the one that understands you." She didn't reply, but that night, when he came to her apartment, she opened the door before he knocked. One Friday, they hosted a small dinner for the executive team. It wasn't a public declaration, but those with eyes could see the current beneath the surface. The way his gaze settled on her during the toasts, the way she leaned into his shoulder during a quiet lull between courses. That is the way neither of them needed to prove anything anymore. After the guests left, the glasses were cleared, and the laughter faded into memory. Layla stood barefoot, arms folded by the window as the city shimmered beyond the glass. Ethan came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and rested his chin gently on her shoulder. They didn't speak. They didn't have to, because for once, neither of them was performing, neither was protecting. They were just being, together, unhidden. Later, in bed, as she lay curled against him with her cheek pressed to his chest, she whispered something she hadn't dared say in months. "I used to think love was a transaction, something that needed to be earned." Ethan stroked her back gently. "What do you think now?" "I think maybe it's a place, a quiet place where I don't have to prove I deserve to be." He kissed her temple, slowly, tenderly. "Then let's stay there." And they did. Not without arguments, not without hard days, but with presence, with gentleness, with the kind of understanding that doesn't demand fireworks, just steady warmth, like sunlight on skin that's forgotten what it means to be touched kindly. Layla had once built her entire life around certainty. Ethan had once hidden behind achievement so he wouldn't face what he feared. But here, in the stillness, they had carved together, between breath and softness and truth. They had found something far more lasting, something that didn't need to be announced, only held. And for the first time in either of their lives, they reached for it simultaneously, with the same hands. It didn't end with a wedding. There were no flashbulbs, no aisles scattered with white petals, no trembling vows whispered beneath cathedral arches. That ending belonged to someone else's story. This one was quieter, more deliberate, more true. It began with a morning, just like any other, where sunlight slipped through the window of Layla's apartment and fell in slanted lines across the hardwood floor. Ethan stood in her kitchen, barefoot, hair a little too tousled, stirring sugar into her tea the way she liked it. No instructions needed anymore. She walked in, wearing one of his shirts, and kissed the corner of his jaw like she'd always done it. No hesitation. No ceremony. They moved through the morning like they belonged to it. Not hurried. Not desperate. Just present. Their relationship didn't rely on grand gestures or perfect moments. It existed in the ways they held space for each other. When Layla stayed late at the office on a Sunday, buried under a proposal she was determined to perfect, Ethan didn't demand her attention. He sent dinner to her desk and waited until she got home, wrapped her in silence and arms, and didn't ask her to speak until she was ready. When Ethan's father's health declined and old grief came roaring back without warning, Layla didn't try to fix him. She sat beside him on the floor of his penthouse, their backs against the cold glass, and let him be a son again. A son who wasn't required to lead, protect, or plan. Just feel. There was no scoreboard, no tally of sacrifices, just an unspoken understanding. Whatever you're carrying, I'll help hold it. One evening, on a rooftop neither of them owned, they watched the city exhale below them. "I used to think stillness meant failure," Ethan said, eyes scanning the skyline. Layla didn't respond immediately. She let the words settle, then reached over and intertwined her fingers with his. "And now?" she asked. "Now I think stillness is what lets me hear myself. And you." She smiled. The kind of smile that didn't reach for applause left you breathless. They didn't become one of those couples who post filtered moments online. There were no captions with hearts or hashtags. But those who knew them, understood the truth. They had fought for this, fought themselves, fought the impulse to run when things got too intimate. And somewhere between the cabin in the woods and the long nights in the boardroom, they had chosen something rare. A love that wasn't built on spectacle, but on patience, on presence, on forgiveness that wasn't always spoken, but always offered. Years later, when someone asked Ethan, off the record, over whiskey in a quiet piano bar, how he knew, he didn't say her name. He didn't need to. He just said, "Because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to earn love. I just had to receive it and protect it." When Layla was asked that same question during a panel discussion on leadership and legacy, she paused longer, then answered, "Because he let me be soft without questioning my strength, and I let him be strong without demanding perfection. That's not love for everyone, but it was ours. Their love didn't change the world, but it changed theirs, and that was enough. More than enough." If this story touched something quiet in you, something real, don't keep it to yourself. Like the video if you believe love can be gentle and brave simultaneously. Drop a comment. Tell us which moment stayed with you most. Follow our channel for more stories that don't just entertain, but linger. Because of the best love stories, they don't always begin with fireworks. Sometimes they begin in silence and stay.